Ryan here with a book. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein starts with a captain by the name of Robert Walton that is on a scientific expedition in the Arctic. His ship and crew become stranded for an unspecified amount of days when ice forms all around them. To Walton and the crew's amazement, they see a man of giant proportions traveling across the ice via dog sled. The next day, Frankenstein manages to make it to Walton's ship and is in a near-death condition. The two exchange conversations whenever Frankenstein feels well enough to do so, and Walton says at one point he's willing to sacrifice his and his crew's lives for the sake of the pursuit of knowledge. And so begins the autobiographical remembrance of Frankenstein's life and current situation. Frankenstein was born in Geneva and came from a well-off family. His family consisted of his father Alphonse and two younger brothers, William and Ernest. There was also, depending on which book you read, his cousin or his adoptive sister, Elizabeth Lavenza. There was also his best friend Henry Clerval and the Frankenstein family servant Justine Moritz. Due to Victor's interest in pseudosciences, he goes to a well-known college in Ingolstadt and becomes extremely versed in the natural philosophies. He becomes so adept at science that he learns how to create life through an undisclosed method. He collects parts from a graveyard and dead animals and creates his monster. He'd given the monster some handsome features, but its skin turned yellow and his eyes were watery when he became animated, and the handsome features contrasted everything else so much that it made the monster look even more grotesque. Victor is so disgusted by his creation that he runs away. The next day, Victor's friend Clerval arrives at the university to begin learning, only to find Frankenstein in a horrible condition and spends all winter nursing him back to health. When finally healthy, he receives a letter saying his youngest brother William has been murdered and their servant Justine was charged with the murder because a locket William was wearing had been found in her pocket. She's then sentenced to death. The monster meets up with Frankenstein when his family goes sightseeing and gives a slight account of his life since the day he was brought to life in Frankenstein's lab. He was confused and couldn't speak and had to learn basic concepts like night and day. He wanders from place to place and is chased out of the first village he comes across. He eventually finds a shed built up against the side of a house whose inhabitants are known as the de Lacy family, consisting of Felix, Agatha, and their blind old father. He learns French by listening to them speak, and one day an Arabian woman named Safi arrives at the de Lacy home. She can't speak English and doesn't know European history and culture, so Felix teaches her and the monster learns along with her while hidden in the shed. Finally able to read, he reads the papers that were in Frankenstein's dressing gown and learns who Frankenstein is, where he lives, and how he was created. He starts hating Frankenstein for giving him such a miserable existence. The monster wants to befriend the de Lacys, so he talks to the blind father while the others are out. Felix and the women find the monster talking to their father, and Felix chases him out. The monster sets out for Geneva and is shot along the way for saving a man's drowning daughter. The monster makes it to Geneva and finds a young boy who is scared by the monster and mentions his father's name, Frankenstein, and says his father will punish the monster. Hearing the name Frankenstein angers the monster so much that he strangles the young boy and takes the locket and puts it in Justine's pocket. After this small recount of events, the monster demands Victor make him a woman just like him so he won't be so lonely, and says they'll disappear to South America away from the neighborhoods of men. But if Frankenstein refused, he would devote his existence to killing man. Victor agrees to the monster's demands out of a sense of duty he felt he owed the monster since he was in fact his creator. He starts up his monster creating endeavor on a remote island in Scotland, accompanied by Clerval, who thinks the whole thing is a sightseeing trip. One night, while working, Victor sees the monster is watching him work with a smile on his face. It angers and disgusts Frankenstein so much that he destroys his work. The monster arrives soon after and is furious that Victor broke his promise to him, and swears revenge and tells Frankenstein he will be with him on his wedding night. Frankenstein gets in a boat along with the pieces of the she-monster and dumps it into the water. He falls asleep in the boat and wakes up on a shore in Ireland and is arrested for the murder of Clerval. He's proved innocent of the murder charges and goes back to Geneva. He finally marries Elizabeth and stays up all night with a gun ready to fight the monster to the death when he hears two screams come from a different room in the house. Elizabeth is dead and Frankenstein's father dies of grief soon after. Victor devotes himself to destroying his creation and chases the monster further and further north until they are near the North Pole. After he finishes telling his story, Frankenstein dies and the monster comes aboard to pay his final respects to his creator and says he's going to kill himself by lighting himself on fire. Captain Walton sails back home touched by Frankenstein's story and mostly at the request of his crew. Okay, so one of the big talking points about the book is the question of who was the real monster. I hate seeing this Tumblr quote of knowledge is knowing Frankenstein isn't the monster, but wisdom is knowing that he is. At no point does Frankenstein do something so awful that he deserves to be called a monster. Yeah, he was selfish and self-centered and created life out of a selfish reason of wanting to be loved by a creation, but he'd also had the thoughts of making man eternal and being able to bring back past loved ones. So what did he do to be considered a monster? Is it because he didn't love his creation? Frankenstein was still a human being, and literally no person that set eyes on that monster liked it. Yes, Victor created life, but he was still a man, so let's not hold him to a higher standard than we should. Don't get me wrong, the monster got a ton of rough breaks like being ugly as shit and feared and hated on sight, but he was an intelligent creature that had a sense of morality and knew that the actions he was committing were wrong. He says it in the book himself a couple of times. So it is my belief that the monster was in fact the monster, and Frankenstein was a flawed human just like all of us are. People will say that Frankenstein was wrong in not making the monster a mate, but was he really? Up until the point of their meeting, the monster murdered Victor's brother, framed Justine, and mocked Frankenstein repeatedly. He wondered whether or not the mate would even like the monster because the monster already hated himself, and what would stop his supposed spouse/mate from hating him and herself also. I feel like Victor weighed the consequences in his hands and made the right decision in not making the she-monster. Another question is whether or not the monster is inherently good or evil, and I believe he was in fact good at the beginning of the book. He did save someone's life and had the chance to kill Felix de Lacy, but he chooses not to. As I said before, he was the monster, but he was turned into it by his situations. He was definitely a malignant being towards the middle and end of the tale, and his crimes were inexcusable, but I believe he was a sad product of his situation. There are plenty of biblical references in the book, so perhaps the monster who Victor originally intended to be beautiful came out hideous because he was an unnatural form of life created outside the hands of God, and Victor's suffering was his punishment. These are only speculation, and the only person who knows the true themes of the book is the author. There are also feminist critiques and reviews of the book, but I would shy away from those unless you're taking some kind of feminism and literature course in college. These reviews reach really far and grasp on any small thing that could be considered a point. I feel that how we interpret a book is up to the reader, but I think it should be within reason, and I just personally don't think the points brought up from the feminist perspective are accurate, and it's mostly the projection of their sociological and political beliefs into the book. Another question is if science is bad or not. I don't think Mary Shelley believed science was bad, but believed that science should be checked with morality. The reasoning is backed by the text in the book where Frankenstein says that if science gets in the way of happiness, one should do away with it. That isn't word for word, just a recap. Anyways, if this video helped you out, like, comment, and subscribe. I plan on making the videos of better quality, so consider these early videos the pioneering videos of my channel. Once again, thanks for watching.